So when we think of blood pressure, let's understand what is considered normal blood pressure, and let's understand what is blood pressure in it of itself. So when you go see your doctor, often it is very customary for the doctor to measure your blood pressure. Often you'll see two numbers. Now, what are those two numbers, you may wonder? There's two numbers. There's the top number and the bottom number. The top number is what we call the systolic blood pressure. Now, that is supposed to be the highest number because that's the point where the heart has to work the hardest to pump blood. So often that's the point in the cardiac cycle where the heart has to pump at its maximum pressure through a series of pipes that have very thick walls. So often you can imagine a pump and a long pipe. That heart is pumping blood against a very thick wall, and that's the reason why that's a higher number. The bottom number occurs when the heart is relaxing. So that when the heart is relaxing and the blood is coming back, it also has a pressure associated with it, and that's that bottom number. So that's supposed to be the lowest number. Now, the textbook definition of normal blood pressure is 120/80. And so if you measure your blood pressure and you get that number, then you deserve a big tick. That's fantastic. Often, if you get over 120 to the 130s, up to 100, before 140, if the top number is less than 140 but above 120, you're getting towards the territory of what we call pre-hypertension. So you're setting the stage for creeping up to hypertension, full-blown hypertension. And so, but if you get to the point where it's above 140, then by definition, you have hypertension, by definition. And if you have that over a series of multiple measurements of that, then that's where that diagnosis is given to you. Now, often, the reason why the bottom number, we focus a lot on the top number, but the bottom number is also very important because it gives us a sense of the severity of the condition. So if that bottom number is quite high, then let's say above 100, then we really begin to worry that, okay, this is getting out of control. So that's why we worry about those two numbers. Now, the question is, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, low blood pressure is not as bad as having high blood pressure. Yeah. So if some people have naturally low blood pressure, and that's normal for them, and that's fine. Now, how is blood pressure controlled? Now, this is very important because by understanding this, we have a better understanding on how we treat it. So the way blood pressure is controlled in your body is really an interplay. The way I like to summarize it is an interplay of three key systems. In order of importance, I would say we have the mechanical or cardiovascular system. If that system is impaired, we call that the primary hypertension, and that's the most common cause of hypertension, is primary hypertension. 80% of people with high blood pressure have an issue fundamentally with their cardiovascular system, which is that pump and pipe system that I was talking about. Now, the other system, which is next of importance, is what we call the biochemical system. It's a series of chemicals that interact with different organs of your body that helps keep the pressure in the blood stable. And the fancy term for that is called the RAS system, which stands for renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Each of those words are different chemicals that act at different points of the body. And it's very complex, and it takes a lot of time to have a good understanding of that. But just understand that there are chemicals in your body that is integral to keeping your blood pressure the way it is. And that involves things like thirst. So there's a substance that induces thirst in your body, and that triggers you to drink water because that's your body's way of trying to regulate its blood pressure. So that's where that system comes into play. So when you feel thirsty, it's probably, you're getting to a stage where it's already, you're a bit late in the game, and you should be drinking more and more water to catch up. Now, the other factor, the other system, but it's not as important as the other two systems, is called the sympathetic nervous system. That sympathetic nervous system is what we call the flight or fight. So that's when you see a lion and you know that you need to adjust and run away from that potential predator, and the body has its own way of reacting to that, such as increasing your heart rate, increases your blood pressure, because it's trying to shut down and try and preserve the vital organs. And by preserving the vital organs, it shunts blood towards that, and that means your blood pressure naturally increases. It means your pupils dilate so that you can see clearly and see the danger more clearly. So that's where people often, when they see me in the hospital, people tend to have higher blood pressure than normal, and we call that a white coat effect. Often I reassure patients, look, don't worry, I'm very flattered, but that's you don't have to worry about that, because often by the time they get home, that regulates back to normal. So when I was thinking about this concept of blood pressure, the fact that it's such an insidious disease, if you leave it uncontrolled, it can lead to dire consequences. I can't help to think the way sin occurs in our Christian experience when we let it uncontrolled as well. And James chapter 1, verse 14 kind of gives me an idea of how sin has its effects over time. James chapter 1, verse 14 to 15 reads, "But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed." So that's the first step. Then after that desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it's full grown or reached to full maturity, gives birth to death. So obviously, when God said to Adam and Eve, "If you eat this fruit, you will surely die," perhaps they were anticipating that maybe it was an immediate institution event, but they didn't die that day, right? It occurred over time. Sin had to take its effect, but they did eventually die. And similarly, when we allow sin to reign in our lives, that is the end result. So it's important that we allow Jesus into our lives and deal with the sin problem so that it doesn't get to that point. Amen? So, how do we deal with hypertension? Well, it's similar to how we deal with the sin problem. So here's a stepwise approach in dealing with it. If you follow these steps, step by step, from the ground to the top, you will find that you're going to have very good control of your blood pressure. So the first step is to avoid harmful habits. Smoking, alcohol is a big no-no. That is not going to do your cardiovascular system any good. Simply the fact that you're going to create atherosclerosis more easily, and that means the heart is going to work harder to pump blood. So that's just fundamentally a big no-no. Reducing salt and high-fat diets is another reason. If you go up to the next step, this is very important, losing weight. If you lose even just a small amount of weight, the drastic effect on your blood pressure is exponential. So I highly encourage people, if they feel like they're not quite reaching their weight goals, to try and keep working hard and reach their goals, and they'll find a massive impact on their blood pressure. Regular exercise is also very important. I cannot stress the importance of that, because that gives the cardiovascular system tone and potence as well in dealing with stress in the body. And another thing that is at the top there is called the DASH diet. Now, this is the mainstream literature, what a lot of clinicians promote. The DASH diet, let's go through what they mean by the DASH diet. The DASH diet, essentially the point of the DASH diet is for people who just want to start somewhere. Maybe they just have a very poor diet and they just need somewhere to start. Often the best way to start is to reduce your salt intake, and they calculate according to that pie chart different servings to do that to people who have just very poor diets. And then by so doing, the principle is to reduce the salt intake, reduce their fat and cholesterol, and increase consumption of fruits and vegetables. Look, this is good, and there's evidence to show that by implementing that, you will reduce your blood pressure, but I believe from the studies that I've looked at, there's something even better. There's something even better. And I was very fascinated by this study produced by the Journal of Geriatric Cardiology. They looked at patients who adopted a whole foods plant-based diet, and they noticed that it's a far superior diet. So they looked at 3 different groups. They looked at patients who, what we will call, quote-unquote, vegans, so whole food, no animal products. And they looked at those patients who had that strict diet but no exercise. And then they looked at patients who were endurance athletes. So these were people who did a lot of long-distance running, but they had a complete Western diet. And then they looked at the last group, which is the sedentary subjects, but they're also on a Western diet. They found that the vegans who didn't do any exercise outperformed, had better blood pressures than those who were endurance athletes. And we know that exercise is a very important component in reducing blood pressure. So that just shows how powerful it is that adopting a diet like that can prove very beneficial to your blood pressure. Okay, so what are some of the foods that we can look at to reduce your blood pressure? Now, the foods that we look at, obviously, adopting a whole foods plant-based diet, you can't go wrong with that. Adopting the New Start components that we've talked about in the past, you cannot go wrong with that. But I like to be very targeted. And one of the foods that I've studied is that foods that are high in magnesium are very potent in reducing blood pressure. Why is it that magnesium reduces your blood pressure? Well, magnesium increases the amount of nitric oxide. It also increases a chemical called prostaglandin E. And those two substances help dilate your blood vessels. It's also a natural calcium channel blocker. So calcium channel blockers are actually types of medications we give to patients to reduce their blood pressure. Okay? Now, if you eat those foods, you're actually naturally doing the same thing that those medications do. Foods like spinach, nuts like cashews, peanuts, any type of nut really. As you can see, bananas, oats, avocado, mentioned spinach. All of those foods are very rich in magnesium. On top of that, there's no harm in taking a magnesium supplement as well, especially if your blood pressure is outside of the normal range. It doesn't hurt to do that. So these are some of the foods. If you want to take notes, feel free to do that, or take a photo of that, feel free to do that. But those are the foods that will greatly benefit you. Now, but this is a thing that people don't always talk about, but I cannot stress the importance of drinking water. I cannot stress the importance. Drinking water, we talk about that pumping system. When you understand that, it helps these concepts really, it's much easier to understand because you want to reduce the viscosity of the blood. So it's important that you drink water to put less stress on the heart and when pushing the blood into your circulatory system. So thank you for listening. I hope you guys got a lot from that and how to reduce your blood pressure. And I wish you guys Godspeed. And so without further ado, it's now time to go to our lessons. And we have, for those who are new here, we have several different classes. We have a couple of classes here. We have a class just outside at the foyer there. And we have a youth class in the other room there. If you need directions, feel free to ask. Thank you.